Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey everybody, it's me, your host, Joe Slepsky. And welcome back to Joe on Show, the only podcast where I cover every episode of the Sunbow, cartoon, DIC, even extreme, and where we went through every issue of Marvel's Real American Hero comic book, issue by issue, page by page, panel by panel, all the way through to number 155. So now what? What's next, you're asking? Well, the answer is here today, and that is You on Joe. You, the Joe fan out there, the guy or gal who's loved G.I. Joe since the 80s, 90s, or maybe even the 60s, or maybe you recently found your love for the Real American Hero. I want to feature you. G.I. Joe can mean many things to many people. Some of you love the cartoons, others love the comics. I know most of you love the action figures. There's Sunbow cartoons, Extreme, Renegades, Marvel Comics, Devil's Due Comics, IDW eras. There's the 3 3/4 classic toys, the classic 12-inch toys, the modern classifieds, vehicles, playsets, video games, coloring books. Everything and anything with G.I. Joe on it is up for discussion on You on Joe. So if you want to participate and be a guest, please reach out to me on social media at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Joe on Joe Pod, or send me an email to joeonjoepod@gmail.com and let me know what your topic is. The more specific, the better. We really want to drill into what's the one favorite thing that you love about G.I. Joe. So while you're online, please give us a rate and review on your podcast app. Every review helps grow the show. If you're so inclined, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/joeonjoepod and help keep the show afloat. Speaking of that, let's give some love to our fabulous sponsors, the Movies and a Meal podcast. In the beginning of time, the smallest organism gained sentience and thought to itself, I really need a good meal. Then, a bunch of other stuff happened, and finally the Lumiere brothers started showing movies in France. This was all the inspiration that fellow broadcasters Brad, Keith, and Ben needed to combine these two primal needs into the Movies and a Meal podcast. The Movies and a Meal is one of the most casual and relaxing film talk podcasts you could ever listen to. These three friends enjoy a good meal together while talking all about the movies. And not just reviews, they do favorite lists, comparison discussions, genre talks, anything and everything that you can think of. They've even broken their solemn promise inherent in the name and branched out into TV talk. So I love the variety of films they bring to the table. They cover new releases, classics, cult films, often in one episode. It's really a delight to listen to, and it has something for every movie fan out there to enjoy. So if you're looking to grow your podcast library, if you eat meals, and if you've ever seen a movie, then you should give Ben, Keith, and Brad a listen and subscribe to the Movies and a Meal podcast. They've been a great sponsor to this show. I love the Movies and a Meal podcast, and I'd like all of you to love them too. So this week on You on Joe, we are spotlighting the one, the only, the living legend, Sergeant Slaughter.
A tin hut! All right, at ease. Then on second thought, maybe not. I'm Sergeant Slaughter, and I got some real hairy action heading your way. Action that would send most guys screaming for their mama. But then the Joes ain't most guys, are they?
Past guest and friend of the show, Joey Kochick, reached out to me and said that he loved the Sarge, and that Sarge was his touchstone to the G.I. Joe franchise as a kid. So that's what we're talking about today. Sarge was born Robert Rudolph Remus in 1948, and he's best known worldwide, certainly, as the legendary professional wrestler in the real world, Sergeant Slaughter. His large frame and even larger chin fit both the larger-than-life wrestling world as well as translating to the animated frame with a kind of an uncanny resemblance. He started wrestling around 1972 for the NWA, which is the National Wrestling Alliance. And he dabbled in the American Wrestling Alliance as well. This was under a mask. He went by the name of Super Destroyer Mark II, which absolutely would be a fabulous name for a G.I. Joe vehicle or Cobra. That is the greatest name I've heard in researching this. Now, he joined the WWF for the first time in 1980, and he was a bad guy. In the wrestling parlance, they call that a heel. And yes, I'm calling it the WWF because even though it's been the WWE since 2002, this all took place when it was the WWF. So I'm saying the WWF because it's real to me, darn it. Ironically, Sarge's signature move, and the one that would stay with him to this day, was actually called the Cobra Clutch. Pretty funny. Now, this was in the WWF in the years, it was right when Vince McMahon was taking over from his dad. So it was still considered like a regional territory, East Coast. It wasn't yet the national juggernaut that it would become. So in 1981, Sarge left the WWF. He returned to the NWA, where he toured the globe. He refined as that military persona. Remember, this was also the early 1980s. So G.I. Joe, as the new 3 3/4 version, it hadn't yet hit the stands. It was still a national, let's just call it, disrespect towards the military, coming off the end of the Vietnam War. So seeing a military figure as a heel at that time wasn't too much of a stretch. I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on how much of the return of G.I. Joe influenced the American adoration of the military forces. 1982 was that explosion of G.I. Joe toys, right? Suddenly military was cool. In the late 70s, movies like Coming Home, and then in 1982's First Blood, there were many, many others. They started showing the human costs of the Vietnam War. And, in my personal opinion, that was like the opening that the American public needed to separate the individual soldier from the military-industrial complex. For Joe fans, if you guys think about all those times we saw Snake Eyes' origin, he would come back from Vietnam and he would be getting spit on by the public. This is what I'm talking about. The public's ability to separate the soldier from the military machine. And I really think that was driven really heavily by media, strongly by the movie portrayal stuff. And then I do genuinely, in my opinions, I believe G.I. Joe really contributed to that, kind of cementing that in place. And what's funny is wrestling has always kind of been like a year or 2 or 3 behind the times in their charactership, right? So it makes sense that even though the tide was changing in the like 1980, 79, 80, 81, people's opinions were changing towards the military and getting more patriotic, certainly Reagan and all that WWF would still be showing, and whatever NWA and all the other wrestling, they would still have Sergeant Slaughter as a heel. So that actually fits perfectly in my brain timeline. But it was during this sea change, this change of opinion really, that in 1983 when Sarge returned to the WWF, and this time he did come back as a good guy, as they call it, a face. It was an opponent to the Iron Sheik, who himself was riding high, or low, as it were, as a villainous Middle Eastern heel. He was briefly the WWF champion before Hulkster took it back from him. Now, it was during this time that Hasbro approached the Sarge to become a living member of the Joe team, to be immortalized as an action figure, first as a Flag Points mail away in 1985, and then packaged with the Triple T tank in 1986. He made his comic book debut in G.I. Joe issue number 48, cover dated June 1986, which would have put it on the shelves around February of 1986. It was later that year, 86, that he debuted in cartoon form in Arise, Serpentor, Arise. The cartoon imbued Sarge with an almost superhuman strength, throwing people around with acts of musculature never heretofore seen by a G.I. Joe member. And he acted as a de facto drill sergeant and instructor for the team. When the movie dropped in 1987, he actually was really given that role. He was given his own team of renegades, a group of miscreants that only his specific brand of discipline can whip into G.I. Joe shape. So as the backdrop to all of this G.I. Joe action, the real Sarge actually left the WWF in 1985. Most reports agree that his exit had to do with a dispute over his participation in the G.I. Joe line. WWF at the time was developing their own line of action figures, which butted up against the Hasbro plans. Now, whether it was ownership over the character, quote-unquote character of Sergeant Slaughter, or just an overall lack of dedication, because with the WWF feeling that he was splitting his attention, Bob Remus, or Bob Slaughter as his friends had taken to calling him, he packed his bags and he moved over to the AWA. Now, this was during the height of the G.I. Joe connection. Sergeant Slaughter was all over G.I. Joe products, from the promo catalogs to the lunch boxes to Halloween costumes, to coloring books. And beyond just the Renegades, Hasbro also gave Sarge his own sub-line of blue, brown, and green themed variants called Slaughter's Marauders. He even filmed legendary live-action intros for the cartoon series, so this would welcome young viewers into and out of the commercial breaks as they were watching the reruns. When he returned to the WWF in 1990, this was during the height of the actual first Iraq War. The WWF brought him back in as a heel, teaming him up with the Iron Sheik, this time as an Iraqi sympathizer. It's actually wild to watch these interviews at the time because like he's just praising Saddam Hussein and how great the great Saddam is. And you're like, that's the Sarge. And then you're also like, did Vince McMahon do this to get revenge for him leaving him in the first place? Like, I don't know. This is obviously clashed with his image on the cartoon and the figures and all that stuff as the patriotic G.I. Joe member. Whether the catalyst was his heel turn in the WWF or it was just a natural expiration of his toy appeal, it was just right around this time that Hasbro ceased their partnership with the Sarge. It would be about 15 more years until Hasbro re-embraced the Sarge, and more recently was actually given a Funko and classified version of the Sarge under the G.I. Joe banner. I know there's a lot more details to cover about Sarge's legendary G.I. Joe and wrestling career, but it's this backdrop that we pick up our conversation with my pal, Joey Kochick.
So grab your helmets and buckle on your bandoliers, because here comes the first chapter of G.I. Joe the movie. Yo, Joe!
I'm excited, man. I'm excited that you're doing this.
Dude, the moment I didn't even continue the episode, I immediately brought up the email. I was at work and I was like, oh my God, we have to talk about Sergeant Slaughter. We have to do this.
So what, like, why Sergeant Slaughter? Why?
So I have this kind of funny story of, so I was born in 85. So G.I. Joe was already like partway through. And then by the time I was actually like lucid and paying attention, it was over and in rerun. So I watched G.I. Joe in the mornings before school. And oftentimes they would re-show the movie in 5 parts or just have Sergeant Slaughter do those like intro outro things in front of the American flag before commercials and stuff.
Over the next 5 days, you're going to see the greatest G.I. Joe adventure of all time. With the greatest roll call of Joes ever. Hawk! Duke!
Pass me through. We've got to warn him.
And Roadblock. And yeah, even your old friend the Sarge.
And I was like just young enough to like not totally understand the difference between, you know, wrestling real and real. And then like he's in the cartoon, but then he's also a real guy. And so I was thinking like, did Sergeant Slaughter quit G.I. Joe to become a wrestler? And then like my dad's like, no, he's a wrestler who plays a character on a show. And I'm like, no, he's real. I see him every morning. Like he's a real guy. And then if he was a wrestler, wouldn't he change his name? And I was so like, for a while, I was so incredulous and so confused before I realized how it all went together. But like, I was like, no, this is a real guy. Wait, he's on wrestling now? Like he's going to kill these poor dudes. Like,
when did the illusion break for you? When did you finally sort, or all these years later, have you never really sorted it out?
I would say I figured it all out like maybe I don't know, a year later. I was like really little. I was like 7 or 8 when this all happened. And you know, once I started realizing like, oh, okay, because he's in this thing and he's in that thing, but there was no internet back then, so I couldn't just Google Sergeant Slaughter and realize his name was Robert Remus. He was Sergeant Slaughter, and he called himself Sergeant Slaughter in wrestling. And he was called Sergeant Slaughter in the cartoon, and then there was a real guy, and they were all the same guy, so I was so confused.
Oh, I love it. Well, let's circle back. And Sergeant Slaughter, like you said, his real name's Robert Remus, born in 1948. And he came up in the late 70s at the same time as Hulk Hogan, which is something that I never knew, because Sergeant Slaughter, you know, as a kid, I didn't really get into the behind the scenes stuff on wrestling, right? He's got that old man face because that huge chin, right? So even as a young man, you watch these old wrestling videos now, he still looks like he's in his mid 40s, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And he was in his, mid 20s or 40. Well, I guess he like 48. So I guess he was in his mid 30s when I'm watching these like early wrestling videos of him, or, like right around 30, 35, he looks damn near 50.
Yeah. He it's funny because that was another thing was how like he's nothing like body wise the cartoon version,
Sure.
but he's still just a giant man though. He's like 6.5 feet tall.
He's huge. He's absolutely absolutely. In the
But, like,
in the
it was-
cartoon version, they kind of played up that strength. They made him like he was just picking up Dr. Mindbender and Serpentor and tossing him out of helicopters left and right. You know? Yeah. He was as close. I think he was as close to a superhero in the G.I. Joe universe as G.I. Joe really gets.
Yeah, because I think the last time I was on, I shared the story of how like he was my favorite action figure as a kid, and I would set up these big elaborate things with all my different action figures from different properties. But then no matter what happened, it was always Sergeant Slaughter who came in at the end and would just throw guys across the room and like save the day.
Yeah. So he started wrestling in 1972. So that puts him at 25 years old. Yeah. So he like joined when I started professional wrestling. I'm sure he was doing it younger than that. And here's the thing. There's a lot. I'm going to do as best a dive as possible into some of the personal aspects. I know there are some people who are going to be like, I know everything about Sergeant Slaughter. We're going to do our best. If I get stuff wrong, I apologize. Maybe we'll do a follow-up corrections.
I
corner.
definitely don't know everything because I've been watching a few things here and there and realized like, oh yeah, I never heard of that. I've never seen that. But
well, he came into WWF in 1980, and his big thing. It's so funny that he became a G.I. Joe, eventually became a G.I. Joe guy. Because what was his? Do you remember what his big move was?
Well, yeah, it was the Cobra Clutch.
The Cobra Clutch, but that predated him being a G.I. Joe guy.
Which was another confusing thing for little me, thinking like, yeah, his finishing move is literally about beating up Cobra. So like, who's first? G.I. Joe, Sergeant Slaughter, Wrestler, Sergeant Slaughter.
Right. I was definitely introduced to him. Well, I would have seen him. No, I would have seen him in WWF. Yeah. I know I saw him in WWF first. I know I did because a friend of ours, father, not kidding, dead ringer for him. We thought, in fact, we were so young, we thought his dad might have actually been Sergeant Slaughter in disguise.
Yeah.
Like we thought, because we didn't see his dad around. He was he was raising our friend, like single father kind of stuff. So, we didn't see him at a lot of the whatever social, neighborhood events and stuff. But when we would be like, well, we never see his dad a lot. And his dad looks just like Sergeant Slaughter. And he's a good athlete. He's a good athlete. So of course Sergeant Slaughter's kid would be, is his dad Sergeant Slaughter? And I'm not kidding. That was an actual urban legend that ran around Chicago Ridge briefly.
That's awesome.
Turns out not Sergeant Slaughter.
That you know of.
That I know of.
Of.
Yeah, I guess technically I've never seen him in the same room.
Allegedly not Sergeant Slaughter.
Everything I've heard from a friend of the show, Jeremiah Stafford, his uncle was a wrestler, and he knows Bob Slaughter, as they all call him, I guess. Like friendly wise, through that. So he's met him through those connections, and apparently he's as nice a guy as you could ever want. To me, apparently he is just such a good dude.
I mean, I would hope so. He's like the greatest of the greatest American heroes. So.
I mean, yeah, but you remember when he went heel though?
Right, but I mean, wrestling, they're great at playing it up.
It's so true. And he did that during the G.I. Joe era, which I think made Hasbro a little unhappy because he was right in the heart of his G.I. Joe contract.
Oh, yeah.
And there he was wrestling.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, like spitting on the American flag and, talking about how great the war in Iraq was, Desert Storm, the first one, how great Desert Storm was and all that stuff. Saddam Hussein, like praising, like the great Saddam Hussein sent him his curly-toed boots and things like that.
That's one of those things where like it's weird because I used to be like obsessed with wrestling in like teenage years and I would watch all the old stuff. So like I have some memories of that, but I can never place the years. But I do remember kind of sort of resolving that myself. Like, wait a minute, he was a bad guy? Like I thought he was a good guy. So that must have been crazy for like kids back then.
That was really confusing for me personally as a child. That was, I did not know what to do with that. So he first appeared in the cartoon in Arise, Serpentor, Arise, Part 1.
That Joe's in trouble. No, the Cobras are in trouble. That Joe is Sergeant Slaughter.
Don't mess with Sergeant Slaughter. He's as strong as they come. I've seen him take on 100 Cobras and set them on the run.
Meet Sergeant Slaughter and his Triple T tank.
Sergeant Slaughter is now a part of G.I. Joe. A real American hero.
Lift
The Adventure of G.I. Joe.
And look out, Cobra!
Sergeant Slaughter comes with Triple T tank, Cobra figures and equipment sold separately.
And this was the 5-parter. So this would have been the one that kicked off season 2. You know what I'm talking about within the G.I. Joes, how they would do the 5-parters. So this was after the first giant season of 60 some episodes, and they had already had the to start the whole series. They had Pyramid of Darkness and Mass Device and stuff. This was the season 2 5-parter that started everything. It aired in 1986. He also showed up in that, so that's on the cartoon. June of 1986, he showed up in the comic books. So that's right around the same time, and that was in G.I. Joe number 48. He showed up. And
was he drawn like exactly the same between the cartoon and the
pretty
comics?
much, yeah, pretty much. They didn't. Larry Hama did not use him a ton in the comic book. He would show up occasionally, but Larry was famous for kind of ignoring things that were happening in the cartoon, like but following instructions as far as what characters they needed to feature in order to sell the toys. So when the toy first comes out, Sergeant Slaughter's in a few random episodes and shows up a little bit later, but he's never the the lead of the series like a Snake Eyes or early on Clutch was, or Hawk certainly was throughout most of the run of the series. Scarlet, Flint, like that. He would be a dude that would show up that would get you excited, and then Larry would go back to his regular stuff. Sergeant Slaughter had a big part in that Arise Serpentor Rise. He was Eddie's disease, and all that jazz. And certainly, when you get to the G.I. Joe movie, huge.
Yeah, me and my friends, even in like high school, we would watch that movie just to hear all his lines. We loved it. It was so great.
Itty bitty ditty bag. If Beachhead's their drill instructor, so Slaughter is like their Uber drill instructor. Like he leads the Slaughter Marauders.
Take your mean Cobra. Wait till you meet Slaughter's Marauders. Technically Slaughter's Renegades from the movies, and then they gave him a sub-team called Slaughter's Marauders. There's me and Spirit and Footloose on the attack.
Slaughter's Marauders to the rescue!
Take this.
What was your toy? What was your toy selection like?
Oh my god! When I was a kid, I had all the G.I. Joe because my older brother had them.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all there. We had this absurd bag full of toys. 3 feet in diameter bag of toys, and Transformers, G.I. Joe, Mask, all that stuff from like my brother's age, and then I had all the Ninja Turtles, the Aliens figures, Star Wars figures, and I would just mix them all. Power Rangers was a huge one for me. I would mix them all up.
And whatever happened to those toys? Did you keep them?
I also told this story last time, I believe, is that my
mom, listen, last time might have been 3 years ago, Joey.
Sold the entire toy box with all my toys in them to some old guy who I'm sure made bank off of it.
I do remember that. Yeah. So Slaughter Marauders 1989. And that was a sub team made of Barbecue, Footloose, Low Light, Mutt, and Spirit. I'm always curious as to why, when they did Slaughter's Marauders, why they dropped the Renegades. Because the Renegades...
Because they were like reformed Cobra, weren't they?
Yeah, they were Mercer and Red Dog and Taurus. There was one who's technically was a reformed Cobra, but Taurus and Red Dog were kind of just supposed to be like mercenaries, right? Like, dudes that probably wouldn't be fit and wouldn't be allowed in the G.I. Joe team normally, but they were capable enough, but they had a bad attitude. So Slaughter had to break them down and kind of get them in.
I'm sending you to the slaughterhouse.
Looks like the old Sarge is gonna have to step in and get involved personally. I've been inspecting you. My name is Sergeant Slaughter. My job is to whip you into shape. And I'm talking whip. Fall into formation this time tomorrow. Yo, Jill.
Right, because I always looked at Slaughter was like to the G.I. Joe what, like, at least in my school, that like the shop teacher was, where like give the troubled kids something to do and keep them in line. And Sergeant Slaughter was that for the G.I. Joes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is how they set it up, and that's what the Renegades were. And so if we're to actually extrapolate that, and see that since none of those renegades made it on the Slaughter's Marauders, maybe they all washed out. The Slaughter's Marauders color scheme is great. So it's taking the Slaughter, the V3, is it the V3 Slaughter look, which is like blue and green and brown, and it just gives that same color scheme to everybody. And no one, I mean, they look like when they're all lined up together. I'm looking at them, on yocho.com. They look like a Neapolitan ice cream bar. Just all of them together. They're all different flavors, and Slaughter's leading them all. So when did you get excited when he would do the intros? And
oh my
stuff?
God, that was my favorite thing. I lived for those things in the morning. It was just such like a cool thing that like this favorite action figure of mine and my favorite guy in the show is like a real guy, and he's on TV, and you can see him like every day. And I think originally he only did it for the movie when they would show the movie on TV, but then they eventually like just started reusing it whenever they could.
Yeah. And
so since I only ever saw G.I. Joe in those weekday mornings before going to the bus, like that was my jam. Like I loved seeing those little intros.
A Ted Hut, G.I. Joe, be right back.
Yeah, and it would always confuse me because he wasn't on a ton of the regular shows, like the actual regular episodes. He was certainly on a few, but seeing him, I would then expect to see him on the actual episode, and then he wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the rights to him were always hinky because WWE rather is very, they protect their trademarks like gold. So they just put out a Sergeant Slaughter G.I. Joe Classified, but that was after my understanding is that was after a lot of negotiations because he also had one come out through the I think the Valaverse, which is like an alternate G.I. Joe toy line, but apparently there was just there's always some issues about the rights of like how like Dwayne Johnson rarely goes by The Rock because The Rock is owned by WWE, that kind of dispute. Yeah. They kind of got away from Sergeant Slaughter in mid 1990 because he was an Iraqi sympathizer.
So I like very vividly remember the movie. It was the only G.I. Joe thing we had on tape, and I used to watch it until it wore out. So that was another reason why like he meant the world to me because he was always there, and then I'd watch the cartoon, and then like he wouldn't be in an episode. I'd be like, man, all right, whatever, no Sarge. But he was always my number one guy, and that tape literally got melted in the VCR. I played it and rewound it so many times.
He was really integral in the episode, which I've always loved this episode, My Brother's Keeper on Sunbow, which was where it was a sci-fi episode. They go to the science fiction convention, like with sci-fi. Do you remember this episode at all?
No.
Yeah, it's great. And Slaughter's in that, but it's all about like sci-fi and him being a weirdo, and Slaughter's there to accompany. But the episode's great, and then to have Sergeant Slaughter be a part of it too is awesome. Now, Sergeant Slaughter he was also prominent in this other episode, which is a lot of fun, Ninja Holiday, where Wetsuit goes to compete in a martial arts tournament. And Sergeant Slaughter goes with, yeah. It's a good episode.
I'm going to look.
It's like Kickboxer. Yeah.
I'm going to look all these up when we're done, because at the moment, there's too much stuff in my head. I don't remember any of it, but I bet once I start watching it.
Yeah, it's basically like Kickboxer, that episode was. And he does show up in DIC. He's in Operation Dragonfire. He was in Pigskin Commandos, the football episode. For being a celebrity guest star, he really was embraced by the G.I. Joe. He's certainly embraced by the G.I. Joe community, but he really was embraced by the G.I. Joe creators.
I mean, he must have been a huge, I mean, not that G.I. Joe wasn't on its own huge, but he must have been a huge pickup, like, for them to get, because he could be, much like to me as a kid, like, he could be the cartoon character and he could be the real guy in, like, commercials and stuff. That must have been amazing for them.
Well, so G.I. Joe had Sergeant Slaughter. They also had William the Refrigerator Perry. Now, Fridge, though, didn't get this kind of treatment, right? He got a mail-in figure, and that's pretty much it. Fridge was never in the cartoon. He was never in the series. He just was a mail-away figure. And then they tried to get Rocky Balboa, and Stallone, it got far enough in negotiations where Marvel made an entry for him in the G.I. Joe Order of Battle, which is basically the official handbook to the G.I. Joe universe. Mm-hmm. So there's an entry for Rocky Balboa in there, but then something fell through at whatever last minute. I'm sure it's Stallone wanted either more control than Hasbro wanted to give him, or something or other. But then Rocky Balboa was never made into an action figure. So
yeah, I was watching something this morning where someone had photos of like a prototype of the Rocky G.I. Joe.
Was it an actual a prototype of an actual toy or the drawing?
It looked like if you took a G.I. Joe and took all the joints and elastics out and spread it out, sort of like Da Vinci style.
Maybe that may exist. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised. Big Boa, which was the Cobra boxing instructor, my understanding is that he was designed and meant to be like the foil for Balboa. Mm-hmm. I think the name Balboa, Big Boa, also connects there. But then the figure never came to be. But he is listed in the handbook of the Marvel Universe, or handbook. Well, it's called the Order of Battle, but it's basically the handbook of the G.I. Joe universe. So G.I. Joe has a history of they did a Roddy Piper figure for one of their conventions. Really? Yeah, years like in late 2000s or early 2000s, I think. There's a Roddy Piper G.I. Joe figure, so they've got a history of doing that, which is kind of neat. And they've done figures for like Larry Hama and custom figures for some of the people who are integral in creating the figures, but like celebrities outside people, yeah. There's a Roddy Piper figure that exists. Wrestling and G.I. Joe has a real close connection.
I mean, I can imagine like it's G.I. Joe is always like the action figure. The stuff you could do with them were the coolest.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I would want to be a G.I. Joe figure if I could. I don't know why they'd make one, but I'd love to be one.
Well, now you can. They make they have the custom G.I. Joe thing.
Oh, really?
On. Yeah, sure. You can do. It's expensive, man. I think it's like $75 or something. But you scan your face. You use their web portal, scan your face, and they build a 3D model of it. And
that's awesome.
And but I think the only body they have is Snake Eyes, and then a female. I think it might be Scarlet.
I mean, it's basically my body, so that's perfect.
Yeah, I meant to say that. Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Basically, Snake Eyes. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny.
The only body model is the Kochick.
As we're talking about this, I'm realizing like I think I'm like recovering from like PTSD from my figures getting sold. Like I have all kinds of other nerd stuff all over here. I should go buy my G.I. Joe figures back.
Well, you absolutely should. Well, you should. What you should do is you should find the guy that bought them and break into his house and steal them back.
There's no way that guy's not dead of old age. He was an old man. He was an old man when he bought my stuff 25 years ago. No hate on that man, but like he was already old. I can't imagine he's still alive.
Well, then there's probably a good chance that his belongings aren't being well cared for.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Find him and steal him back.
I'm just saying. So,
I'm not above it.
Now, did you have the Triple T tank version of Slaughter? Like, did you have the one that came with the tank, or did you have the mail away?
I see. My brother would have been the one that got it, so I don't know how it came, but it was the one with the green tank top and the red, white, and blue USA on the chest.
Oh, that was the mail away. Yeah, that was the mail away.
It was the mail away. Yeah, that would make sense. My brother probably would have done that.
Yep. That was the mail away. I had the version with the Triple T, and I don't believe mine had the US of A, or did? Yeah, I had the. So you had the 1985 mail away one. Yep. And mine.
Oh was, yeah, yep. That's
yeah. Mine was the black chested one.
That's definitely the one we had.
Yep. Mine was the black chested one that came with the Triple T. So yeah, so when I see them, I always think of the black T-neck. I don't think of the USA one. I've never had the USA one. Triple T was a great little tank. I mean, you ignore the fact that you're sitting in an exposed cockpit being shot at.
Yeah.
That's par for the course for almost any G.I. Joe vehicle. Sergeant Slaughter, did you ever see him? Did you ever see him or any other like WWE wrestlers? Did you ever go see them live?
Oh, I've been to a bunch of shows live. I saw Sergeant Slaughter, but this was in the 90s when he was like commish
No, okay, yeah, sure.
So he was well past the point of wrestling. But at the Fleet Center in Boston, we would go every time Raw came or SmackDown came. And yeah, there was quite a few times that we saw Sergeant Slaughter as Commish come out.
Oh, cool. And did you ever get a chance to meet him?
No, we never got close. We would try so hard every time we went there to find a way to like get to the parking lot or get backstage. And the only person we ever met was the Big Show.
Oh,
We managed to sneak backstage one night, but he was, I guess, I don't know, he was just chilling by the door that we went through, and he scared the bejesus out of us. He screamed at us, "Oh, you kids!" And we looked and we see this giant man yelling at us, and then like he let us stew in it for a minute, and then he smiled and he's like, "Sorry guys, you can't come back here," and he like ushered us out.
that's hilarious.
But that's the only one we ever got to meet.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
There's Destro's Razorback. Razor sharp and Hawes wild.
Now, did you have any Slaughter memorabilia? Because he did a lot. He had Bubble Bath. He certainly had his. He had a WWF action figure, non GI Joe. They did a GI Joe micro figure. He was featured on like stuff like party plates and party balloons. He had a GI Joe costume, a Halloween costume, one of those plastic faced with the plastic body costumes.
I was obsessed with the figure. I carried it everywhere until it was not cool to carry an action figure around. And then the only other thing that I can remember was it was like a frisbee with Sergeant Slaughter on it. I don't know where it came from, but I had a Sergeant Slaughter frisbee.
That's so cool. So are you active on Twitter right now, Joey?
I'm not on Twitter. I am on Instagram.
Okay, because Sarge is way active on Twitter. That's what I want to get across here to our listeners. If you're hearing this and you want to talk to Sergeant Slaughter, it's not terribly difficult. He's great, or whoever's running his Twitter. He's like @_SGT Slaughter. He follows the Joe on Joe show, him or his people, whatever. But he's always he's always giving people replies and giving people follow backs, whether it's him or his team or whatever. It's great because you see the joy that fans have in interacting with him. And I love it. Like he's just a genuinely bringing joy to people, and he embraces the G.I. Joe stuff too. He's still, he's still considered himself, a G.I. Joe. Like he's, Yo Joe all the time.
Yeah. I saw, I don't know when this interview, it's definitely recent, last couple of years at least, that I was watching this morning. And yeah, he's all about being a Joe. I love that stuff.
Oh, it's so good.
I love it.
Yeah, it's really good.
I'm looking at the Sergeant Slaughter Yo Joe page right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm realizing there is another thing that I had.
Oh.
I 100% had the G.I. Joe official field belt. I had all those things.
Sergeant Slaughter with his face on it?
Yeah, I definitely had that.
That's the Live the Adventure era. Yeah.
I remember all of those things.
Awesome. So you had a trench knife, a compass, a whistle. You had your own rape whistle. There's a canteen. Was it it's probably a working flashlight, right? It probably worked.
I think so. I know the canteen. I definitely used the canteen camping for a long time as a little kid.
Yeah, and a little shovel. What do they call those tiny shovels? Like,
God, I don't remember. But I'm having memories now looking at this, carrying around that canteen and that compass. I definitely played with those.
Oh, that's cool. That's so cool. Would you ever do him for Halloween?
Yeah, absolutely. I would. I have 3 go-to costumes when I don't have a good idea. One is Roddy Piper.
Yes.
One is Jack Burton.
Yes.
Then one is Snake Plissken.
You have you have the makings for a Roddy Piper costume?
Yeah, I have the kilt, the t-shirt, the what do you call the thing, the codpiece, everything.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think the challenge is thrown here. I think you need to get together a Sergeant Slaughter outfit.
I'll do it. Yeah, absolutely.
USA.
I'm gonna definitely do the mail away figure one. I'm gonna get the green tank with the USA on it. We actually have a fantastic Army Navy store down the street. I bet I could put this costume together in an afternoon.
Totally. Did you keep his baton or did you lose it? I imagine that baton is quite pricey these days because I imagine a shit ton of them got lost.
We definitely had. We were very good about all our action figures. Inside our action figure bag, we had a Ziploc baggie with all of the weapons. We never lost any of them.
Oh, that's good. Man, you look at this figure and they really did a good job in capturing his likeness, especially, dealing with 3 3/4, the detail wasn't always, it's not, let's say it's not what it is today. He absolutely looks like Bob Slaughter.
Yeah. I wonder what it would cost to grab that figure if someone has it.
Oh, I bet you.
I would, if it's not prohibitively expensive, I will literally buy it right now.
Well, let's do this. Hold on. Let's do this live. Let's do this live on the show. Yeah. So here's an 86 Slaughter with file card. That's the one I had, and he's still got an hour left, but he's only bidding at $12. I mean, I think he's attainable, Joe. Well, here he is with the Triple T going for $90. Okay, hold on. Here's a $30 Triple T one. There's some toy collector listeners screaming, "You're spending too much. Don't do it." Oh yeah, this dude's elbow is all jacked up. I don't want that.
Because I'm never gonna resell any of my stuff. It's
right.
just for my own enjoyment. So I rip everything out of the box. I play with it. I put it on display. And if my heart wants it, whatever, I'll pay $40 for a Sergeant Slaughter.
I'm going to do a little more research. I mean, I know listeners, you got excited. You're like, is he going to pull the trigger live on air?
There's one right here that I will 100% bid on, but it's got 4 hours left, so we're not going to be recording.
Yeah.
4 hours.
There's just too many variables going on here. I'm not sure. And to be honest, I know I sold mine because I sold all my vehicles, so I know I would have sold him with that, but I don't remember if I've replaced him since then. So before I make any hasty moves. But I think it's time to reintroduce Slaughter. I did get the Slaughter classified figure. As they're on eBay, can you see those classified ones? And what I love about the box is they give you they represent they represent him, they represent the more wrestling style of him, they represent the cartoon, and then they represent the comic book version. They did a nice job with that box. I really enjoy that box.
Oh wow, yeah, that's really cool. My computer takes forever to load it up, but it's
you could see all the different. It's representing the eras of what Sergeant Slaughter was, so that's pretty cool. This has been delightful. This has been a delightful Sergeant Slaughter talk, Joey.
I mean, I don't have a ton to say, but I'll still say the few things I know over and over again. I love talking about Sergeant Slaughter.
Well, I appreciate you joining us here on You On Joe. And,
this is the best idea I've heard in a long time. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Oh, dude. Well, I'm excited. Thank you for being in our inaugural episode of You On Joe.
I'm so happy you asked me. It's great to be back on.
And now you know more about Joe, and Joey's half the battle.